Today, oh, sorry.
There we go.
So today we're going to focus on something that I learned in my experience in the last 8 years in therapy, and I found it very helpful. And it's a concept called thinking myths or cognitive distortions. And this is based upon the idea that our thoughts and our perceptions can really hold us back and really cause damage in that sense. And there's a type of therapy, if you'll go to the next slide,
Yes.
and
Just
it's
gonna
called,
skip
oh, I'm
over.
sorry about the intro.
Don't worry. Don't
Yeah,
worry. Don't worry. Let's go to that slide. There we go.
perfect. And so, as I mentioned, it's how when our thoughts work against us, they refer to that as thinking myths or cognitive distortions. So, in the next slide, it talks about the type of therapy that kind of addresses this, and it's called cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. And they have a section that really focuses on this type of distorted thinking that is often associated with depression and anxiety and other difficult mood situations. And if we go to the next slide, it addresses CBT, three main principles. So in this model, there are three principles associated with this type of distorted thinking. So number one, moods are influenced by our thoughts and perceptions. So the way we think affects our mood. Number two, negative thinking is often falsely interpreted. It's distorted. Um, Number three, moods can be improved when we change and reframe our thoughts. So we don't have to be stuck in that kind of rut. So as the next slide talks about is how can we change? And that is really important to understand that and recognize that we can change how we think. And in order to do this, though, we have to identify and track our negative thoughts. So, how do we do this? How do we gain control over our mood? In CBT, they use a model that's called cognitive restructuring. And what this addresses is how we falsely believe that a particular event or action is what is actually causing the emotion. So we see it as event, cause, emotion. So we interpret whatever happened to be how we're feeling. And so as we move on, it's important to recognize that there's more to it, that this type of thinking is very limited. And that is because there is an important in between step, if you will, and understanding that there is an interpretation or a thought about that event. That is what's actually causing the emotion. That is what's causing how you feel, is that interpretation. So if you'll see on the next slide, it talks about the model and what it really looks like according to CBT. And that's the idea that there's an event. And then that's the idea that there's a thought, belief, whatever about that event. And then the C is the consequence or the emotion that we're feeling. And so I think the most important maybe takeaway from today is that awareness is healing. So awareness allows the potential to heal. When we engage in like continuous, false, distorted types of thought, we often create emotions that contribute to our anxiety and our depression, including anger, loneliness, fear, sadness, shame. And for me, post injury, I could say that shame has been a pervasive thought pattern and can really bring me down. And I could get stuck in it and continuously think about thoughts that contribute to that feeling. And so, as you all know, when you survive a brain injury, we can fall prey to defining ourselves by who we no longer are. And the good news is we can control our mood when we are aware, when we become aware of these thoughts and perceptions. So the next thing is why? Why is it important to identify our thoughts? So when we name and identify these types of thinking patterns, distorted thoughts, The good news is it allows us to change them. And I had a therapist tell me once, name it to tame it. And this is basically the idea, just naming how you feel. Oops. Naming how you feel is enough to bring your parasympathetic system down, to calm yourself, to kind of just saying how you feel, consequently, okay, this is what I'm feeling. And it actually is proven to help your body calm down. So I want to go forward and talk about the types of thoughts that hurt us, some types of thinking that contribute to our negative emotions. So one type of thinking that very common is all or none. And this is when we see things black or white. It's very rigid, it's inflexible, it's limited. And for me, I know it firsthand, it can often contribute to perfectionism and anxiety. And example, I got a C in math, therefore I failed, and I'm a terrible student. So that's all or none. Another type is overgeneralization. So this is when we see a single event as a never ending pattern of defeat. So this would look like, I didn't get the job I interviewed for, therefore I'll never get a job. Why even try? So you could see how that could work against you. Another type of thinking is when we disqualify the positive. And this type of thought is very conditional, when we reject our positive experiences by insisting they don't count for this or for that. Always a reason. So an example would be, even though my professor says he likes my work, he praises my other classmates, he's just being nice. So disqualifying the positive feedback we get. Another type of thinking that can harm us is when we catastrophize. This is when we are exaggerating or minimizing, our experiences. So example, I can't believe my voice started to tremble when I gave a speech in front of my class. Everybody notices. Everybody thinks I'm stupid. I'm sure they wanted to laugh at me. So that's a type of catastrophizing. Another type of thinking that can contribute to negative emotions is when we assume, it's emotional reasoning. And this is when we assume that our negative emotions reflect the way things are. I feel it, therefore it must be true. So I feel fat, I am fat. This is important to remember, that our thoughts are not feelings. Just because you think that way, that doesn't make it true. Another type of thinking is personalization. And recognizing this type of thought has really helped me in my interpersonal relationships. It's when we see ourselves as the cause of a negative event, when in reality, you're not responsible. So example, my parents seldom come to visit. It must be because they don't like my apartment or my friends. Taking things personalization. So the good news is, when we move on to now what? Where do we go from here? There is the chance, the opportunity that we're able to identify our distorted thought patterns. And when we identify, we can change them. So to truly create a meaningful shift, it is really important to name and identify that type of distorted thought. So once a thought pattern is labeled, where do we go from there? So once it's labeled, the thought or belief can then be replaced or reframed to be more truthful of what really is, to be more rational. And consequently, this will improve our mood. So something that we can do is challenge ourselves. We have to challenge ourselves to change. When we challenge our negative thoughts, we create clarity and we open the door to a profound opportunity to move past these negative beliefs that have held us back. So some questions that we can ask ourselves to help challenge these thoughts would be, is this based on fact? Is this objective thinking? Is this reality? Or is it my opinion? Does it protect my life or health? Does this type of thinking help me achieve my goals? Am I thinking in a way that keeps me out of conflict with myself and others? Does this type of thinking help me to feel and act the way that is best for me? So, lastly, I want to leave it with that it is essential to remember that this process of recognizing, labeling, and restructuring is hard, but it is possible. And I'm saying that from personal experience. And it is natural that we are, often reluctant to give up our longstanding beliefs and thoughts. Obviously, it's a pattern, it's been wired, and this takes time and support and practice to do this. But once we start, we can manage our moods and improve our lives. And that's that.
Absolutely. Well, that so good, Allie, and so many things, so many takeaways from that. And I think it really is so important, and you bring it up in this presentation, just about being mindful of
Right.
the thoughts. And I love how you mentioned that, just how the thinking or the thoughts can then,
Right.
then turn into where we actually believe it. And that's the
That's the
scariest
hard
thing.
part. No, that's the hard part is, yeah.
And
And it
to,
like, I have this like written out. There's some additional ones I could add in a PDF that, like, when I'm feeling just in a rut, I'll like look and think, okay, is this the type of thinking that is messing up my mood? What is, like, if I'm feeling awful, I'm trying now to work backwards and kind of see where my thinking was. If that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. Well, I love it. This was such a good
Good.
topic, and definitely something that, what I love about it is that there's action items that we can pull from this and actually try to implement. And um, the name it to tame
Name it
it
to
is
tame it.
still my
It's
favorite.
a classic.
And it applied in another area, or a lot of areas, but I remember one before, of like the emotions and naming it and being able
Yeah.
to try to get rid of it once you are able to
A
identify it,
hundred.
right?
Yeah. And even
Um,
like if you identify where it is in your body, that kind of helps too
that's
to
deep.
calm it. Yeah.
That's deep. Well, um, awesome job. Let me go ahead and stop the recording. Let's see here.